look at the former C&EI and Union Pacific's Villa Grove Subdivision begins in familiar territory at Dalton, Illinois. CSX train M566 to Buffalo, New York is beginning their journey departing Bar Yard on the railroad's Bar Subdivision. Dolton Junction never sleeps, and a line signal lets us know westbound on the parallel Indiana Harbor Belt main is imminent. The train is Norfolk Southern Manifest 35J, which is the railroad's daily train from their large classification yard in Elkhart, Indiana, to the IHB's Blue Island Yard just another mile west of here. Looking west, a Union Pacific intermodal transfer job running as train IYCCN is returning to the railroad's yard center just south of here from Canadian National's former Illinois Central Markham Yard. This IYCCN runs every day and is part of the two railroads' Falcon intermodal service between Mexico and Canada. Two rebuilt EMD SD40Ns are light engine for yard center as the intermodal transfer continues snaking onto the Union Pacific. As many times as we've seen Dalton on this channel, we've never paid much attention to the Union Pacific through here. That's about to change as we take an in-depth look at the modern rail operations of Chicago's joint line, following Union Pacific and CSX action up and down the Villa Grove Subdivision. Our tour of the line begins just around the corner to the southwest of Dolton Junction at 142nd Street. We're on the north end of the railroad's yard center terminal, and the line's Missouri Pacific heritage is still obvious with the uniquely short signals guarding control point I-016 in the north end of the yard. Mainline track work is ongoing this hot summer afternoon. Yard center's intermodal ramp and engine facility is west of the main, while the freight yard is to the east. To put some additional perspective on our location, we're looking north to lens a westbound intermodal train on the CSX Bar Subdivision crossing the Villa Grove at grade. Swinging off of the Indiana Harbor Belt main is Union Pacific train MPRAS, a daily manifest from the railroad's former Chicago and Northwestern Proviso Yard bound for the UP's Alton and Southern subsidiary in the St. Louis Metro. Both manifests as well as unit trains use trackage rights over the IHB to bridge the gap between the railroad's former C&W system to the northwest and Missouri Pacific to the south, and Dolton Junction is the furthest north on the old MoPac. Most UP rail traffic moves from here. This MPRAS will be entering yard center for a crew change and to work the yard before continuing south. When these scenes at 142nd Street were shot in June of 2023, the CPKC merger was still a fresh topic, and Kansas City Southern power destined for St. Louis seemed to be quite the common occurrence on these manifests. a less common northbound signal at Dolton Junction. In addition to Union Pacific, CSX makes extensive use of trackage rights on the former C&EI, an operating practice that stretches back decades to the Missouri Pacific's 1967 purchase of the railroad. One condition of that purchase required the MOPAC sell the eastern line of the property from Woodland Junction to Evansville, Indiana, to the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, while the MOPAC retained the western fork to St. Louis. While just about every aspect of railroading has changed in the last 50 years, this is one rare exception, and the CSX continues to use the line as its primary route for trains from Chicago, bound for far southeastern destinations in Florida and Georgia. One such train was daily manifest M648 between the railroad's large yard at Waycross, Georgia, and the Belt Railway of Chicago's clearing classification yard in Chicago. This train was abolished just about a year ago, and its traffic is now reblocked on other manifests to and from Chicago. We've moved 2 blocks south to 144th Street in the north end of Yard Center. A CSX trackage rights train is awaiting northward clearance to the BRC, while another IYC-CN transfer has just gotten their power out of the shops for a run to the CN. Power on today's CN transfer is IC-944CW2716, as well as a rebuilt EMD GP15N, the UPY 695. The former Missouri Pacific Jeep was a staple of Yard Center for years, but was retired from service by the railroad in May of 2025. Yard Center can get quite busy, and the northbound counterpart to the MPRAS we just saw is working the yard to the left. From here we'll head to the south end of Yard Center at control point I-919. Two miles south of our last location is the village of South Holland, Illinois, in the south end of Yard Center. Woodlawn Avenue parallels the South Yard leads and provides a great public view of train action as yard switchers toil around the yard and manifests make setouts and pickups. 2 separate freight poles make up Yard Center, those being 8 yard on the west side and 9 yard to the east. A yard job is switching 8 yard with an eclectic combination of a Rail Power RP20 BD genset as well as an EMD SD70M. Another yard job can be seen working 9-yard and is classifying a great amount of aging 86-foot auto parts boxcars destined for the CHTT at Chicago Heights. Note that both of these jobs are remote controlled. With their next track pulled, it's time to start switching. Note that this is not a hump yard, the train is being flat switched. Traffic through Yard Center is largely blocked for and destined to the Alton and Southern at East St. Louis, Illinois, the Indiana Harbor Belt at Blue Island, the Chicago Heights Terminal Transfer at Chicago Heights, as well as other local industries. The process of reclassing trains is never over, and Yard Center has done it efficiently for decades. The lead remote unit on this yard job is UPY 913, an RP20 BD genset built by Rail Power as part of a 14-unit purchase order in 2015. The UPY 900 through 913 saw almost exclusive service at the Yard Center terminal. However, like most genset locomotives that have been built, never lived up to the same reliability of the EMD road switchers that have ruled the rails for decades, and began being pulled from service one by one as each unit turned 10 years old through 2025. Throughout this video, we'll make an extra effort to capture the transition of power as we work between Yard Center and Chicago Heights. Amtrak uses trackage rights on the line from Thornton Junction, less than a mile south of here, to the north end of the line at 81st Street Junction. Yard Center is being passed by the westbound Cardinal from New York City on the final stretch of its lengthy trip to Chicago. Trying to get creative with the otherwise blocked shot, we catch a reflection of 9-yard switching power on the partially frozen Little Calumet River. Another interesting lash-up of diesel power is on this job, being a venerable EMD GP15-1, the UPY 608, as well as another SD70M, likely tacked on just for the extra horsepower, UP 4422. We'll watch a bit more yard switching in 8-yard before continuing our tour down the Villa Grove Subdivision. On a rather hot summer afternoon in June of 2023, we're taking advantage of 159th Street being closed for construction as we catch an MASYC on the very last leg of their trip to Yard Center. The MASYC and southbound counterpart MYCAS continue to operate as daily manifests between the Alton and Southern's Gateway Yard at East St. Louis and Yard Center. From here we'll head another half-mile south to the former Grand Trunk Western crossing at Thornton Junction. Thornton Junction, or as it's now referred to by the UP, Control Point I-020 is the crossing and interchange with the former Grand Trunk Western, now CSX Elston Subdivision. CSX intermodal trains as well as unit trains bound for Western carriers will use the south-to-west connection at Thornton Junction for runs to the railroad's Bedford Park Intermodal Terminal as well as the Belt Railway of Chicago. Looking north, we see the same 8-yard switcher that we were just watching pulled out quite a ways south of Yard Center for headroom. Later on in the day, we catch loaded CSX phosphate train B207 from Florida's Bone Valley using the connector onto the Elston sub for eventual interchange with the BNSF at Cicero. These phosphate trains are quite common on the line, especially during the springtime, and never fail to provide an eclectic mix of older covered hoppers. We've moved an additional half-mile south to 173rd Street. A restricting signal at Thornton Junction tells us a northbound will be entering the yard. The train is job YCH72R, which is a daily transfer job to the Chicago Heights Terminal transfer from Yard Center. Today's train has an EMD lover's dream for power in the form of 5 rebuilt GP38Ns. Every Jeep on today's CHTT turn, with the exception of the later or former Missouri Pacific GP38-2s, and are right at home lugging Ford tonnage out of Chicago Heights. This large string of boxcars are loaded with body panels manufactured at Ford Motors' large Chicago Heights stamping plant and are destined for various Ford assembly plants across the country. Ford traffic's been a staple of the CHTT and Old Mopac for many years, and the operation has traditionally depended on the 86-foot auto parts boxcars we saw earlier. However, as of the making of this video in 2026, that is beginning to quickly change as the Union Pacific transitions to these 60-foot high-cube boxcars. Other assorted CHTT industry cars are making up the end of this 72R. From here we'll head a mile south to the village of Thornton. Thornton, Illinois is located 2 miles south of Yard Center at milepost 21.8 on the Villa Grove Subdivision. The village of Thornton is home to just under 2,400 residents and is home to the Thornton Quarry, one of the largest limestone quarries in the world. A high green for a southbound and the vague shape of a distant MASYC manifest can be seen to the south. The signal is for train MPRNL, a daily manifest from Proviso, Illinois to the railroad's large classification yard at North Little Rock, Arkansas. This MPRNL has just finished working Yard Center and is getting their lengthy train up to speed. Keep this lengthy string of former Chicago and Northwestern covered hoppers in mind, which are destined for Villa Grove, Illinois, and eventual interchange with the Kankakee, Beaverville, and Southern Railroad just under 40 miles south of here at St. Anne. Another summer 2023 day at Thornton finds atmospheric instability and thunderstorms brewing above as we wait for more rail action along the old Mopac. Another YCH 72R is returning to Yard Center from the CHTT light engine after delivering industry traffic to Chicago Heights. The 3 gensets on today's train have since been withdrawn from service, replaced with the same GP15s and GP38s they were intended to replace a decade ago. CSX train M502 is now lined up to follow the YCH 72R north. At the time of recording these scenes in June of 2023, the M502 was a daily train between Danville, Illinois and the Belt Railway of Chicago at Clearing. This train now originates at Nashville, Tennessee, and includes traffic that was formerly blocked on the M648 from Waycross we saw earlier. Our last train at Thornton is Union Pacific Intermodal Train ILDYC, which at the time of recording was the daily northbound intermodal train from the former KCSM system at Laredo, Texas to Yard Center. This evening's train has a very appropriate Kansas City Southern leader, SD70 ACE KCS number 4102. This train has since had a shift in origin to San Antonio, Texas, but continues to serve the same function of moving intermodal traffic south of the border to Dalton. Some of this traffic will end up being transferred to the Canadian National at Markham Yard as part of the Falcon intermodal service. Next up, we'll head another mile and a half south to Glenwood. Immediately south of Thornton is the village of Glenwood, quite a bit larger with a population of well over 8,000 people. Downtown Glenwood is located at milepost 23.43 on the Villa Grove Sub and is home to Gabe's Place Restaurant, just about the best breakfast you can find in southern Cook County. Southbound CSX train M647 to Waycross, Georgia can be made out to the north, making their way through Thornton. It's now June of 2025 as another MPRNL rolls south through Glenwood. A southbound YCH 72R job to Chicago Heights is running alongside the MPRNL behind two venerable EMD GP15s. During the early transition period out of gensets, this GP15 pair of the UPY 644 and 608 offered a welcome shift to older EMD power out of Yard Center, the first of many such changes to come. "60-foot high-cube boxes didn't seem to be a thought at this point in time, with many a beautiful 86-foot boxcar on today's southbound run to the CHTT. It's just about 80 degrees colder at Glenwood as we catch an early 72R transfer returning to Yard Center behind an RP20 BD genset and two rebuilt GP38Ns. To my knowledge, this late December 2025 CHTT transfer would be one of the last, if not the last, trains the UPY 909 would run before being pulled from service. It's now early spring as we catch another CHTT transfer, this one quite late. Today's train is powered by a very appropriate lash-up consisting of nothing but former Missouri Pacific EMDs. Rebuilt GP15N UPY 644 was built by EMD as Missouri Pacific GP15-1 1644 in November of 1979. The UP 636 is a rebuilt GP38N originally built for the Mopac as GP38-2 number 2136, while the 669 was their 2169. All of these locomotives were rebuilt as N-type locomotives by the Union Pacific at their own jank shop, which included total overhauls of the locomotive's electronics as well as increased adhesion and rebuilt cabs. At the time of making this video in 2026, a majority of the railroad's older EMD power, including GP15s, GP38s, GP40s, as well as GP60s, have all been rebuilt to these N standards. The abnormally warm spring evening grows later yet across Glenwood. An MASYC is pulled to Glenwood for a recrew that will eventually run the train the remainder of its trip to Yard Center. A yard job that originated at the railroad's Chicago Heights auto ramp 2 miles south of here is passing the MASYC behind two more EMDs, GP38N number 564 and GP40N 1348. The crew will run these loaded auto racks to Yard Center and return to the auto ramp late tonight with empties for reloading. From here we'll head another 3 miles south to 12th Street Junction at the north end of Chicago Heights. 12th Street Junction is the interchange point between the Chicago Heights Terminal Transfer and the Villa Grove Subdivision. The CHTT has a connection onto the main here, but also continues north to additional industries around the city. The quintuple GP38-powered YCH72R we saw earlier at South Holland is departing the CHTT with a healthy 50-car train of industry outbound from around Chicago Heights. The Chicago Heights Terminal Transfer is a wholly owned paper subsidiary of the Union Pacific, utilizing Union Pacific power and crews, but is in fact on paper its own separate railroad. Like the yard jobs we saw earlier working around Yard Center, this is also a remote control job. It utilizes a 2-man crew for operations. The crew has a rather short 7-mile trip ahead of them back to Yard Center. From here we'll break away from the Villa Grove main for a bit and head down to East End Avenue for a look at operations on the Chicago Heights Terminal Transfer. This is the same southbound YCH72R we saw at Glenwood. The train is now on CHTT trackage and will head just about a mile east up 17th Street to the railroad's yards near State Street. Some of the largest shippers on the CHTT include Ford's massive Chicago Heights stamping plant, the Omaha Track Railroad tire recycling yard, and Chicago Heights Steel, another rail recycler. We'll follow the train and move up 17th Street. The stub-ended nature of the terminal's yards necessitates quite a bit of work to switch trains. The train has been broken into two pieces and the crew has run around the train to begin switching it into the yard. Note today's hard-working YCH-72R crew running the units with remotes, expediting the meticulous amount of switching needing to be done. "86-foot auto parts cars and GP15s. It's almost as if nothing has changed since the days of the Mopac." Another one of the transfers we caught at Glenwood departs the CHTT for Yard Center. An industry local has gone to work on the CHTT, tonight running with two rebuilt GP38Ns. This YCH81 will be doing a good amount of industry work around the Heights this evening, all within the confines of CHTT trackage. The crew has a lengthy train organized for spotting, with tonight's first stop being the Bulkmatic transload on the southeast side of town. Behind Bulkmatic and other traffic is a large string of cars for Omaha Track on the northeast side of town, a large railroad tie recycling yard that both mulches and repurposes ties past their service life. A large amount of unique Union Pacific maintenance of way gondolas are on tonight's train. These unique cars were built by Relco and are used on tie cleanup trains across the Union Pacific system. Despite looking like oversized well cars, they have equivalent capacities to normal gondolas and are loaded with old ties for offloading. The crew will break off these industry cars and will catch up with them across town heading to Bulkmatic. We're at 22nd Street on one of the many tracks of the CHTT. This is old B&OCT trackage that used to run north and tie into the CSX's Chicago Heights subdivision many years ago. A half-mile south of here, the train will make another 90-degree turn to make a near-perfect U around the city to get to Bulkmatic. We've returned to 17th Street to take a quick look at the old B&OCT right-of-way north of the CHTT's hill track. With their work complete and no pulls from Bulkmatic, we've turned 180 degrees to see the YCH 81 job engine light northbound on the old B&OCT. The crew is crossing the 22nd Street grade crossing we were just at. The bridge overhead is Canadian National's former Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Matson subdivision. The crew will now return to their train and continue their work late into the night. We'll return on a hot June afternoon for another rendition of a CHTT industry switcher. The same GP15 pair we saw earlier is in charge of another CHTT job. The crew is sorting industry traffic and will be taking one hopper to Bulkmatic this evening. Note that while both of these Jeeps are RCO equipped, this train is running with a conventional engineer and conductor. With traffic for other industries out of the way, the single hopper can be re-aired and the crew will be on their way. Now on the old P&OCT, the crew continues to bulkmatic while the clouds try their absolute hardest to ruin the shot. With their quick drop-off complete, the crew returns to the yard. It's now winter. Another YCH-72R job is building a very large outbound for Yard Center and will have quite a bit of switching to do building the train. It's 90 degrees colder than our last shot, with wind chills hovering around 15 below zero this January afternoon. An eclectic mix of yard powers on today's train, consisting of a rebuilt GP15N, RP20BD, as well as a GP38N. Quite the hill exists along 17th Street, pulling the track down to the existing grade of the old P&OCT, which crossed a grade many years ago. Because of the stub-ended track arrangement of the CHTT, building today's outbound will be quite the chore, pulling several tracks worth of traffic. We'll head a couple blocks down 17th Street for a closer look at the train pulling another track. Now at the entrance gate to New Farm, another CHTT customer, the train continues trundling west to pull yet another track. Today's outbound train will end up being just under 100 cars. Listen closely to the unique engine sounds of each model of locomotive. Of course, you could also just listen to a semi for a similar effect to the genset. Note that the job is being remote controlled with UP 795 set as the lead engine, evidenced by the lit strobes on the cab roof as well as the overzealous E-bell whenever the train is in motion. At least we have some absolutely incredible cars to look at while the crew builds the train. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying the 86-foot boxcar era of the CHTT will be sorely missed. When these scenes were shot, the UPY 912 would be pulled from service in just about a month, making this one of the last assignments the genset would work before retirement. All of these rail power built gensets were equipped with RCO capability as well as PTC at the time of retirement, and for several years had the distinction of being the last gensets in regular Class 1 service anywhere in the United States. As much as I love the CHTT, EMDs, and trains in general, it was just a bit too cold to keep being a loser standing around Chicago Heights in the sub-zero ice. We'll come back on a sunnier, warmer early spring afternoon for one more 72-hour. It's now March and one of the first nice days of the year. 55 degrees feels more like 75 as another 72 hours building their outbound. Today's train will only be pulling 2 tracks and won't require the excessive westward moves for headroom this afternoon. The large blue and white building behind the train is Ford's Chicago Heights stamping plant, the origin of the high-cube boxcars in today's train. Unfortunately, there is no publicly accessible way to view the railroad serving the plant, but the evidence is plentiful with the many boxcars moved in and out of the heights on a daily basis. With their outbound train of Ford traffic and other CHTT industry cars ready to go, the train departs for Yard Center. Power on today's 72R consists of 2 GP38Ns as well as 2 unrebuilt GP15-1s. We'll chase today's train to Thornton to conclude our look at the CHTT's operations. A beautiful spring afternoon at Thornton, Illinois. It's rather hard to find the old Union Pacific paint scheme on any locomotive, let alone a GP15, but the UPY 664 still sports it to this day. From here, we'll return to Chicago Heights on the Villa Grove Main and continue our journey south to Woodland Junction. Back on the Villa Grove Main, we're a mile south of 12th Street Junction near the South Chicago Heights border. To the immediate north is the former location of J Tower, where the railroad crosses the Canadian National's former EJ&E Matson subdivision at grade. More short signals exist here for anyone who doubts the Mopac heritage of the line. Westbound Canadian National Train L595 pounds the diamonds at Chicago Heights with a lengthy train of traffic destined for BNSF interchange at Eola, Illinois. J Tower is at times quite the rail action hotspot and can see upwards of 50 trains per day. Canadian National's Desk 11 dispatcher controls this junction, and all movements on the Villa Grove sub have to contact the CN for signals across the Old J. With CN clear of the junction, a 2-mile-long MPRAS manifest can proceed south toward St. Louis. Immediately south of our previous location is the north end of South Chicago Heights, Illinois. An old depot now used by maintenance of ways still stands here at 26th Street, as does the sizable South Chicago Heights yard. The yard is empty today, but is often packed with rail cars in storage and at times small amounts of interchange off the CN. In the distance, another CN train is crossing the Villa Grove Sub, this time in the form of eastbound manifest M335 for the railroad's Kirk Yard at Gary, Indiana. With CN clear, we observe the slow but very much functional signal display a high green for a northbound. The train is an empty grain train from south of the border bound for reloading along the TP&W system northwest of here. The train is meeting CSX stack train I-129, which swung onto the old Mopac off the Dolton Subdivision at Thornton Junction. From here we'll head south to Stagger. The village of Stagger is located at the far south end of Cook County and is located immediately south of South Chicago Heights. The village is home to just under 10,000 residents, as well as its C&EI depot, which has sat in disrepair for many years. Northbound at Stagger is CSX stack train I-196, at the time a daily train from Jacksonville, Florida to Bedford Park. This train and southbound counterpart I-195 would end up being abolished on February 15, 2026, by pure coincidence the same day these scenes were shot, making this the second to last I-196 to operate. Up next at Stagger is another miles-long MPRAS for the Dalton and Southern. This train is one move you are just about guaranteed to see midday if you're anywhere along the line between Chicago and Villa Grove. The train will end up being passed on the far main by northbound MNLCH. Certainly unfortunate positioning for the at times ontologically disgruntled camera crew. Our next stop is Crete, another 2 miles south of Stagger. We've left Cook County for Will and have landed in the village of Crete. Like Stagger, Crete has a population of just under 10,000 people and was originally founded in 1836 as the settlement of Woods Corner. The unknowingly last I-195 to run to Jacksonville rolls through Crete behind ES40 DC GEVO CSX number 5475. Traffic on I-195 and 6 is now blocked on the railroads I-025 and 6, which also run between Chicago and Jacksonville, Florida, though both are almost always nocturnal runs across the old Mopac. From this point south, Illinois Route 1 closely follows the Villa Grove Sub as the population rather quickly falls off. Up next to Crete is another CSX train, a more recent rendition of M502 with blocks of traffic off of what was once M648. The train is led by a blissful SD70 Max CSX number 4725. From this point forward, we'll begin hitting much smaller towns and cornfields as we head to Beecher. Seven miles south of Crete is the village of Beecher, certainly the first place we've been to along the line to have more of a small town feel as opposed to infinite suburbia. The village is home to a little under 5,000 people and a small museum home to the village's restored depot and a Mopac caboose. Southbound stack train CSX I-029 flies through Beecher and is passing northbound UP auto train MLDYC. We visited Beecher in June of 2023, and today neither of these trains run in the same form. The I-029, while retaining its origin and destination, now operates as non-priority train I-129. After a several-hour wait, the MLDYC gets rolling toward Yard Center behind UPSD70M number 5011. Beecher, as well as Stagger and Glenwood, are all common holdouts for trains that are either lower priority and waiting for rail congestion to clear, or that Yard Center is not quite ready to accept. While this train now operates with a different point of origin being Brazos, Texas, its function is essentially the same, simply being an auto train to Yard Center from Texas. Our next stop moving south is Grant Park. Grant Park is located another 9 miles south of Beecher, and we're now in Kankakee County. The village was founded in 1883 and today has a population of just under 1,300 people. Two GEs are in charge of a southbound MPRAS tearing through Grant Park. A sizable industry track exists here at Grant Park for grain loading, though it's been a number of years since the elevator is shipped by rail. Next to Grant Park is another I-129, this time with a historically appropriate heritage unit on the head end. Up next on our tour is the city of Momenz. The city of Momenz is anchored at just about milepost 50 on the Villa Grove Sub. We're on the far north end of the city, observing the signal that guards the line's crossing with Norfolk Southern's Kankakee line. Southbound CSX train M501 rips into Momenz behind an ES40 DC GEVO CSX 5384. We've moved just about a city block south to take a look at the NS crossing at control point I-050. On the Union Pacific side, this junction is known as Pence, while the NS refers to it as MJ. More phosphate loads, this time bound for the Canadian National, pound across the NS Diamonds at Pence. With With the phosphate loads out of the way, the Norfolk Southern could get a train through town. Rail traffic is sparse on the old Kankakee Belt route, but at the time of filming this B16 run was a just about daily occurrence running east to Burns Harbor, Indiana with outbounds from the railroad's small Kankakee terminal and back east with inbounds. This train has since been replaced with daily manifests in each direction, though you won't see them much bigger than this abnormally long 87-car train consisting entirely of local industry traffic out of Kankakee. Just south of the diamond at Momence is the Kankakee River and a rare example of an inland island. The river briefly forks here in Momence, and a rather large park takes up a majority of the island, providing a great view of trains on the Villa Grove crossing over the river on 2 bridges. The Kankakee River is a tributary of the much larger Illinois River and runs just over 130 miles in total length. The river drains over 4,000 square miles of land area in the states of Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. Northbound MASYC for Yard Center has completed their leisurely 300-foot run across the island as they fly over the Kankakee River. We're now looking at the southernmost bridge in Momence to catch another northbound UP manifest, train MNLCH from North Little Rock to the Belt Railway of Chicago's clearing yard. This train will work Yard Center before continuing further north to the BRC. We're now at the south end of town along Highway 114. An interchange track with the Norfolk Southern can be seen at right, while a skyline of grain elevators dominates the left. The elevator track here on the south end of town has certainly seen better days. An MBZ-YC auto train to Yard Center rolls north across Highway 114. This is the current rendition of the MLD-YC we just saw at Beecher. We'll be gapping our greatest distance yet and head another 10 miles south to the village of St. Anne, Illinois. The village of St. Anne is located at the south end of Kankakee County and is home to just over 1,100 residents. During our visit in March 2026, however, you'd think we were in the middle of a big city with all this road work going on. We're located at just about milepost 60 here at St. Anne, and a crossing as well as an interchange with the Kankakee, Beaverville, and Southern Railroad exists here at Crete. The village is also home to a sizable grain elevator that actively ships by rail. A northbound MNLCH manifest rolls into St. Anne behind a former Chicago Northwestern AC 4400 CW. The UP 6717 was originally built as C&W 8815 in November of 1994 and has the distinction of being one of the last locomotives built new for the railroad before its 1995 merger with the Union Pacific. The Kankakee, Beaverville, and Southern has arrived to do some work around town. A close look to the left of frame will yield the MNLCH we just caught continuing northward toward Chicago. A combined track on the KB&S provides both an interchange with the Union Pacific as well as lead space into the St. Anne elevator. As we'll soon see, this configuration will necessitate some rather crafty moves to deliver empties to the elevator for loading. The KBS crew has run around the first half of their train through the elevator track to grab their second set of hoppers. 3 cars bound for interchange with the Union Pacific are out of view on the far end of the track, and only part of this train will be able to be spotted for elevator loading. The Kankakee, Beaverville, and Southern operates 155 miles of track across Illinois and Indiana and primarily handles agricultural traffic from their many online elevators. In addition to 6 locomotives, the railroad rosters just under 300 covered hoppers for spawning in elevators along the railroad. These are the same class of hoppers we saw earlier in the video at Thornton. Another EMD lover's dream is in St. Ann this morning as the KBS has passed by an M501 led by another CSX Mac. Work continues on the KB&S. The earlier mentioned 3 cars awaiting UP interchange will be picked up by local LSB 54, which works for many industries and interchanges on the Villa Grove sub. We'll catch up with this LSB 54 returning south a little later on at Papineau. Having run around their train once again, the KBS crew will pull the balance of the empties that won't fit on the elevator track out of the way before returning to their shops engine light. The railroad rosters and operate 6 of these GP38M-2s numbered 701 through 706, and each locomotive bears the name of an employee. The railroad's Jeeps are D-turbo GP40s, all of which were originally built for the New York Central in December of 1965. We'll say goodbye to the KB&S in St. Ann and head south to Papineau. A mere 3.5 miles south of St. Ann is the small village of Papineau. We're now in Iroquois County, and the population has all but vanished, with Papineau having a mere 133 residents. We get a look at the village's disused elevator track and the village of Martinton in the far distance to the south. We haven't seen a southbound North Little Rock manifest since Glenwood. Another MPRNL is making their way south behind 3 GEVOs and an SD70 ACE. The LSB 54 road switcher we saw earlier has picked up their cars from the KB&S and are southbound. We'll follow this train the remainder of our journey to Woodland Junction. Three rebuilt GP40 engine power on today's LSB 54, which works north up the joint line 3 times per week to service interchanges as well as the remaining industry north of Villa Grove, Illinois. The crew has a pickup at Martinton and will slowly follow the MPRNL south. Martinton is just under 5 miles south of Papineau and is just another rural farming community in Iroquois County. The town's large grain elevator can be seen for miles, and silos like these are just about the only significant structures in these far-off rural pockets of life. The LSB 54 crew has made quick work of their pickup here in Martinton and are already back in one piece on the main to continue south. Their next stop is Watseka to pull interchange off the Toledo, Peoria, and Western. We won't be hanging around Martinton for very long, and from here we'll head south to Pitwood. Just another off-the-beaten-path type of town along the Villa Grove is Pitwood, 3.5 miles south of Martinton. Pitwood might just be one of the strangest locations on the line, and is home to a spur track full of old rolling stock that has been rusting to the railhead for years. The spur line and property to the immediate east is, to my knowledge, still owned by Interstate Commodities with the original intention of being used for re-stenciling and making light repairs to their INTX fleet of railcars. Several of these cars are more than 50 years old and can no longer be interchanged, and the spur track here in Pitwood could very well be their final resting place. Additional hoppers are north of the crossing, as is a nearly unrecognizable ballast regulator and small work shed. Another MBZYC auto train flies by the forgotten hoppers on their way to Yard Center. If you've seen our video on the TP&W, our next location will be no stranger as we head to the Iroquois County seat, Watseka, Illinois. At Watseka, the Villa Grove Subdivision crosses the Toledo, Peoria, and Western at grade. The city of Watseka has a population of just about 4,700 people and is the seat and most populous settlement in Iroquois County. The Watseka Diamond marks milepost 77.5 on the old Mopac and milepost 11.1 on the TP&W's Illinois sub. The old CNEI Watseka Union Depot has been beautifully restored and is home to both a rental space as well as a local museum. Two EMDs are in charge of Union Pacific train ZSAYC, which is the current daily northbound stack train on the line to Yard Center. A much warmer and sunnier day at Watseka. An eastbound TP&W crew is rolling into Watseka with a loaded unit grain train. This train originated at the Grainland Co-op at Kruger, 80 miles west of here, and is bound for CSX interchange at Reynolds, Indiana, another 45 miles by rail to the east. We'll leave the Villa Grove Subdivision for a minute for a quick look at some TP&W action. The next town on the TP&W from Watseka is the village of Crescent City, a little over 6 miles to the west. A TP&W road train is rolling into Crescent City with a sizable train of traffic destined for the railroad's many online customers. The train will be doing some work here in town before continuing east toward Indiana. Similar to most short lines in this part of the country, the traffic base on the TP&W is largely agricultural, and some of these hoppers will be spotted at the co-op here in town for loading with last fall's harvest. We'll zip ahead a mile east for a look at the train getting back up to track speed. The crew has just about completed their work in Crescent City, and the village's large grain bins can be seen in the background. TP&W crew puts on quite a show getting their train up to track speed. Power on today's M train consists of two EMD SD40-2s as well as a GP50. We'll continue our eastward pursuit back to Watseka. The train is now observing a 10-mile-an-hour track speed creeping into Watseka and will continue this slow crawl the remainder of their trip to the Indiana state line. The TP&W rosters a decent handful of these former Government of Canada cylindrical hoppers for loading at elevators along the railroad. Certainly a welcome sight in 2026. We'll head a few miles east of town for one more look at the train before returning to the Villa Grove Sub. A little over 5 miles east of Watseka is the distance signal to the railroad's crossing with the Kankakee, Beaverville, and Southern at Webster. The TP&W main gets a bit hilly here, crossing Eastburn Ditch to the immediate west. From here, we'll head back to Watseka. Back at Watseka, the LSB 54 we've been following has snuck onto the TP&W to pull some outbounds off the interchange track. With their work complete, the local trundles back up the TP&W connector to the main. We'll get one more look at this train at speed a bit later on at Woodland. It's just about 50 degrees warmer out on a beautiful late July morning in Watseka. Another Villa Grove local has just dropped off inbounds to the TP&W and are airing up their train to proceed north for additional industry work up and down the Mopac. The sound of a beyond-deafening K5LA leads no question as to the leader on the southbound about to meet the local. A Tier 4 SD70 ACE is on the point of an early-running MPRNL to North Little Rock. Note the UPY 904 dead in tow on the train. As this was July 2025, this was more than likely the unit's death march from Yard Center, never to see service again. Move to the final town on our southward journey, Woodland, Illinois. The village of Woodland is located within the Sugar Creek watershed and has a population of a mere 248 people. Not much exists here in Woodland, though the east side of the main might give you some deja vu to Pitwood. 3 more 4750s have been rotting away in the town's long-demolished elevator's rip track for many years, likely to never move again. If the rust hasn't sold you on how long the cars have been sitting here, perhaps the trees growing out of the southmost hopper will. Another northbound Z train funnels onto the double track behind UP 6609, another GE AC 4400 CW. The train is clearing Woodland Junction, where the CSX and Union Pacific single track mains fork and head their separate ways. With the Z train crossed over, a high green for the local is next. Enjoy some distant EMD thunder as the GP40s get their train up to speed. From here we'll head to our last location on our tour of the joint line at its south terminus, Woodland Junction. At Woodland Junction, the CSX breaks off southeasterly onto their own Woodland Subdivision toward Milford and eventually Danville, Illinois, and points south, while the Union Pacific's Villa Grove Sub continues southwesterly toward Goodwine and eventually Villa Grove. Signage advises CSX crews to operate on radio channel 20 for the length of their journey up the joint line. The signals and crossovers for the junction are just ahead and referred to as Control Point IO83. The distant headlight of one more MPRAS can be seen making their way toward Woodland. The train passes us by just another broad curve shot this line is so great for. Today's MPRAS is just another 10,000-foot monster of a manifest. A CSX crew running his train M500 is just marked up with the Union Pacific dispatcher and has a high green for just another run up the joint line to Chicago. This will bring an end to our journey down the old Mopac, and I really hope you've enjoyed coming along for the ride along one of my favorite Class 1 main lines in the Midwest. And as always, thanks for watching.